What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first ever episode of HNY Talks. Today, we are going to touch on the topic of hardcore, and I don't think we could do it with a better person because I'm here with Mike Scondotto of Inhuman and The Last Stand. Thank
What's
you for
up,
being
Alex?
here.
Oh, thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Cheers.
I don't think there's a better person to talk about hardcore with, and, this was an idea I had for quite a while, and I was like, what is going to be the first topic of HNY Talks? And I'm like, well, it's New York. Hardcore is pretty much like the new sound of New York City.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it sure is. For other people, maybe not, but it's definitely a big part of what makes up the, I think, the culture of the music scene and the underground music scene, the hardcore and punk scene, absolutely, and the metal scene too. This year in particular is kind of an important year for me personally because I started going to shows 30 years ago in May of 1988.
Wow.
At age 14. So I'm dating myself a little, but I don't give a fuck.
Well, it's hardcore. You're never too old
Yeah,
for it.
exactly. Well, some may say different, but it's just something that has been a part of my life for 30 years, and I've built friendships and music and relationships, and I've just devoted so much of my life to it that it's just kind of second nature at this point, obviously,
Absolutely. And you and I have talked extensively on the topic, both with the podcast you were on and from all our adventures at Lucky 13, that
Yes.
Hardcore, and I think you would agreed, it's like the bridge between metal and punk, kind of.
Yeah.
Some would argue against it, but
definitely to a degree. I think what it was initially, it came from punk. It was initially referred to as hardcore punk. That was the initial term for it. It was faster, louder, angrier than the standard punk rock. And then the other big difference was the look.
Punk is dead, shave your head.
Yeah, basically, punk had a bit of a European look to it because the bands that came out of Europe really, were the face of it. Even though the Ramones predate the Sex Pistols and the Clash, the Sex Pistols and the Clash got a lot bigger than the Ramones.
Yeah.
So
they became more of like a brand.
Right. They became the face of punk, and leather and spikes and just kind of more fashion became the face of it. By the time those bands were gone, you hit 1980, 81, you get a very Americanized jeans and T-shirt kind of look, you know, and a shaved head. And it's just faster and angrier.
Yeah, it definitely. And it's funny because I've always, and I mentioned this before, I know plenty of people who are in hardcore, but they hate metal. They'll never they'll never touch a Slayer record or a Metallica record. And when I first listened to hardcore, granted my first hardcore band being Hatebreed, but I listened to Agnostic Front and Sick of It All, and to me the same type of aggression was there. But at the same time, and I asked myself, how could one like this but not the other? And then as I further dubbed in into it, I realized that hardcore was almost kind of like a fundamentally secular sort of stuff.
It's funny you say that because most of the people I know in the hardcore bands love metal, and they love Slayer, and they love Metallica. A lot of them found that first, I myself was a young metalhead first. Nobody's born punk rock. Nobody's born hardcore. Nobody's born, a metalhead. So I feel like a lot of the musicians I know really love it. Fans, yeah, to a degree, you're right. But over the years, I've found, when I look around at when the death metal band comes to town, the black metal band comes to town, there's a shit ton of hardcore kids in the audience. But you don't see the opposite. I feel like a lot of the metalheads aren't as down with hardcore as vice versa.
I agree. I agree. And, for me, I could almost see, maybe to an extent, maybe they like the music, but the live shows maybe is different.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating. Look, I think the younger the kid might be, the bit more intimidated he might be by going to his first hardcore show. But once you go to your first hardcore show, I think you always come back.
Absolutely. I don't know if this even counts, but like my first, would you count Candiria to be like your first hardcore show?
Depends on who else was on the bill.
You were, alas.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, I mean, yeah. Here's the thing with a band like them, you know, they're a metal band. They're kind of like a jazz fusion, hip hop, interesting original band. But there was a time in their career where they were playing with almost exclusively hardcore bands.
Yeah.
And that audience embraced them, and that audience kept with them. So they're like this anomaly, you know? And that's kind of a great place for a band to be. If you have fans from other genres and other scenes that follow you, I think that you know, that's special.
They're one of those bands where you don't have to be like a hardcore head
not
to
at
like
all.
them.
I
like,
mean,
most people I know them like bands like Dillinger Escape
yes,
Plan
exactly,
or along those lines. But I feel like, as you mentioned, like hardcore being kind of like a rebel against punk. You know, like thrash metal with bands like Metallica and Megadeth, they kind of wanted to rebel against the whole glam thing. I feel like hardcore kind of wanted to do the same thing towards traditional punk.
I mean, thrash was almost like an extension of what was kind of just standard heavy metal at the time. I mean, it took, you know, beats from Motorhead, who was like one of the fastest, heaviest bands of their day, and it took beats from punk, and then you have this new genre, thrash metal, which was, you know, with Metallica was like the godfathers of that in a way, you know, and you have your Megadeth, your Slayer, your Exodus, like your first bands to play this brand new music back then, you know, called thrash metal. With hardcore, it was weird. It was kind of like in sections of America. You had, in New York, you had Agnostic Front and you know, the Mob and, you know, Antidote.
Youth
and
then
Today? No, they're actually later on. I'm talking about the early 80s,
okay.
like in the beginning of hardcore. Youth Today came at the second wave. And then in D.C., you had, in the first wave, you had Minor Threat and you had the Bad Brains. And over in California, you had Black Flag and you had the Circle Jerks. And, you know, it's just kind of like, this was the beginning of the hardcore movement, you know. And as the years progressed, you had bands come into a second wave of it. Like you just mentioned, like Youth of Today would be an example of the second wave. Sick of It All is an example of the second wave.
Life of Agony?
No, they are more of like a late second, early third wave. By the time they kind of started in like 89, 90, a lot of people would consider 90 to be like a third wave of hardcore. Their time playing like hardcore music was kind of brief, you know. But in New York, things moved kind of fast. By the time I got into the scene in 88, the matinees were really, really packed already. Like they were like, from what I understood from people who are older than me, the shows weren't as like wall to wall as they were by the time like 87, 88 rolled around. And I just think I came in at like a really, you know, good time. Like, I mean, the first show I saw was Murphy's Law, a band called Token Entry, Super Touch, and the Bad Brains were headlining at the Ritz. And it was a full Ritz. The old Ritz, it was Webster Hall.
Okay.
For reference point. And it was a full Webster Hall in 1988.
This would have been in the Grand Ballroom?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the whole club. I mean, so hardcore was gaining a lot of ground already by the time I had gotten into it. And I was amazed. You know, I was 14 years old, and it was just like, I think I was just like probably had my mouth open most of the show just going, I belong here. You know, like thrash metal was done. You know, like I was a big Anthrax and Megadeth and Nuclear Assault, Metallica guy, and it's funny. I just never looked at that stuff quite the same till years later. You know.
Yeah, and over the years, I've noticed, like with any genre of music in general, hardcore definitely, like a debate would come on what band is hardcore. You and I have talked, like, people would argue that Hatebreed is not hardcore, it's metal. Life of Agony is not hardcore, it's more rock. Like,
right.
So at what point does it not become hardcore anymore? Because to me, River Runs Red is as hardcore of a record as it could be.
Well, the thing is, to a lot of people, it's not. It's like it has just hardcore moments because at that point they were doing some of their old songs, but that record was made up of songs that were newer songs, and they were definitely inspired by the grunge movement that was going on, and Stone Temple Pilots and things of that nature.
They kind of fell into that.
Yeah, no,
whirlpool.
and that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
They found success, so that, I mean, and they're a great band, and they have their fans, and they did what they wanted to do. You know, their beginnings were in the hardcore scene. I remember I was at those shows, and I was in a band back then that was playing with them, and the thing is, I mean, it ceases to be hardcore when it's not hardcore. I mean, is country music hardcore? Can you
No.
play country music and have the singer say, "No, this is a hardcore band"?
I can maybe picture Brad Paisley covering.
Right. I mean,
I got my razors on my wrist
it
because I can't
has
resist.
a sound. It has a look. It has a sound. It has a feeling, and it has, you know, integrity. And I think, I mean, yeah, it ceases to be it when it isn't.
Well, I feel like hardcore music has just as much an emphasis on like the look and the lifestyle as the music itself. Like I was interviewing a band called Harm's Way, which a lot of people would consider to be more metal than hardcore, but like interviewing them, they say Code Orange, Twitching Tongues, Nails, that's hardcore because maybe while they may not sound exactly like Agnostic Front, they're playing like these basement shows and these.
Yeah, that's their hardcore. They're young. They're of a younger generation. That's their hardcore. You know what I'm saying? I know who all those bands are. And the thing is this, a lot of the guys in those bands do like the bands that came before them. It's just, it's all in cycles, you know? It's in cycles and inspirations, you know?
Of course. But like it's weird because as I mentioned, like my first hardcore band was Hatebreed, which a lot of people would argue that that's a metal band and not a hardcore band. So, and I could just see kids who are maybe like 12, 13 years old saying, "Oh, my gateway hardcore band was Twitching Tongues."
No,
or
absolutely.
Code
And I
Orange.
think that's what you probably will hear. The thing is, like, Hatebreed came out of the hardcore scene, always had a metal hardcore sound, you know, metalcore sound, and all of their early fans were short-haired hardcore kids, you know, but they blew up and they got to a major label and they became a major, you know, a major band, and success followed them and new fans followed them. It's just what happens, you know.
Yeah, and I think when people like it's like when more bands like come out like that and people are so mesmerized, then they are going to dig deeper and then discover Sick of It All. And
exactly. I
like
mean, a young kid may not come out of the gate liking the Cro-Mags, Sick of It All, Agnostic Front, and Murphy's Law, but they will possibly find them, and that's the best part, you know, finding like the bands that inspired generations of music, you know. That's
Absolutely.
amazing.
And it works like that with every way. Like I've heard one person say, "Oh, my first death metal band was Kill Switch Engage," and
they're not even death metal
yeah,
at all, though. So that's a
but
weird
that's
statement.
a gateway into
to
screaming,
extreme music,
and then
exactly.
they'll get into
Right.
Lamb of God, and then go deeper and get into Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, I mean, see, I lucked out, man. I really did. There were kids in the neighborhood that were a little older than me and some of my friends, just by about 2 years, a year, whatever. And they saw that we were into Metallica and Slayer and thrash metal, and they would make mixtapes for us of bands that had like Youth of Today on it, and you know, Sick of It All, and Cro-Mags and Crumbsuckers and Agnostic Front, and we liked it and we ate it up, and that's kind of how it all started. And like, you know, my story is probably similar to a lot of people's story. Like, you have like an older brother, an older sister, an older friend that says, don't maybe not listen to that so much, listen to this. Or just because you like that, maybe you'll like this, you know?
And it just works like that all the time. And
Yeah.
you kind of sneak in that one that just is a little over the edge, and before you know it, you're into a whole
But for
another
me,
genre.
like, by 90, around 1990, I'd heard about what was called death metal music. And one of my friends, who's a big metal guy, was like, you have to hear this band Obituary. Because he knew I liked horror movies. You know, I was a big horror movie guy, still am. And he's like, they don't have lyrics. Everything is like, it's like a horror movie. It's like he's screaming and they look like they're dead. And like, this is the explanation I'm getting. I'm like, oh shit, I have to check this out. I always liked the next level of extreme, what was heavier or faster, you know? At that point, I had heard like Ministry for the first time, fucking loved it immediately. It was fucking...
What record cycle?
Let's see.
Because I mean,
Mine's is a terrible thing to take.
okay, because if it was your first Ministry record, it was like With Sympathy.
No, not that. I heard that later on. But hearing that for the first time was just, again, it was just like, holy
Thieves is
shit.
like-
Even as a hardcore kid, I was like, I loved it immediately. So I went to go see Obituary. with Sacred Reich, and they just wiped the floor with Sacred Reich. I mean, it was just like there was no question, you know. And it was an interesting time. It was almost like that changing of the guard from thrash to death metal that was going on in the underground, because thrash metal was kind of done by 1990 for the most part, except for Slayer and Metallica, pretty much.
Well, Sepultura, I think, reinvented it.
But they had touches of death metal in their sound, and they toured with death metal band. Like they were different. They were different. Everybody loved Sepultura. People thought they were the second coming of Slayer back then, but death metal was like the new exciting thing, and I instantly, you know, liked death metal too.
Yeah. Now, being that, you know, all these things, like people said that metal in the 90s was dead, which I think is bullshit. It was dead, maybe.
Incorrect statement ever.
It was dead in the Motley Crue, Cinderella, Poison sense.
And in the commercial sense.
Yeah. But like.
Except for one band in particular, Pantera.
Okay. Pantera pretty much conquered all back then.
And under that, Typo Negative, hugely successful in the 90s.
And I think the 90s was kind of like the first wave where there were, I would say that was the biggest era of crossover genres. Like, you know, people talk crap about all the time, but nu metal was just introduced to cross.
Later on, later on.
And then, you know, Fear Factory combining industrial with death metal, and Sepultura,
See, here's
thrash.
The thing. If you, like you said, if you liked hair metal, you were shit out of luck. If you liked hearing metal on the radio, you were shit out of luck. If you were an underground person, the 90s was the greatest time ever. You had death metal and black metal and a resurgence of hardcore all happened in the 90s.
And that leads to my next question, because hardcore seems to be a genre that's never going to die. When I interviewed Billy from Biohazard at NAMM, he says the hardcore scene is just as good as it was 30 years ago. And I was curious how, because with everything that was happening in the 90s with metal, I'd imagine, though, while hardcore was still alive, there were definitely changes.
There was a weird period in the early mid where there was some really cool bands, but it was extremely violent and crazy. At the mid 90s to late 90s, 95 to 99, fantastic. Great run, great era. Early 2000s to mid 2000s, not that great, honestly. Not that great at all.
Why?
Bands kind of dipping in and out of their sounds, changing their sounds a bit. It reverted kind of in a way more to like this, I don't know, it just not a lot of excitement and just a lot less kids at the shows. Since I was going to the shows, there was less kids at the shows. 05, 06 to right now, I think things have been on a very good, like steady run, actually. Yeah. I would say around 06 in particular, there was just excitement again and more kids coming out, more new bands. And so, yeah, no, everything does happen in cycles. I would not say it's been 30 years of awesomeness. No. Yeah. There have been down cycles, 100%.
Just with like anything. But like when I hear the term hardcore, I always hear like the European use of the word, because people have associated Typo Negative to be hardcore, and they don't sound hardcore to me at all.
No.
I guess because him coming from Carnivore.
Yeah, that's the only.
But they don't
reason.
Sound very hardcore. I think it's just Peter Steele sort of cut his teeth in that movement.
Well, first Carnivore record is kind of like a Venom, Motorhead kind of post-apocalyptic metal record. The second record, Retaliation, is a hardcore thrash crossover record. And also around that time, Carnivore started playing with a lot of hardcore bands. Pete was going to CB's a lot. Pete shaved his head. So that was and is Pete's connection to hardcore. Pete co-wrote a lot of Agnostic Front's second album, and all these little things come into play, and that kind of forever cemented his legacy in the hardcore scene. And a lot of people that say didn't even really like Typo Negative, but they loved Carnivore. Like Carnivore never died, even though they broke up and died. They kind of never died. It was kind of a weird band. They're bigger now than they've ever been, and they don't exist. And Pete's dead for years. It's very strange.
I've not been to one hardcore show out of the hundreds I've been to where I did not hear Carnivore brought up once.
Yeah, it's interesting about the trajectory of that band. It's just, I think people, the internet, I think, and modern technology, and the stories about his time in the hardcore scene and the connection to Agnostic Front. It's just people love that shit, and it's great. It's a great story, and it's, you know, it was a great time period.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a lot of people, you don't know what you got until it's gone.
Exactly.
I did not hear Typo Negative until I read an article about Peter's death, and then I heard
you're a young man.
Yeah, don't rub it in. And then another thing about hardcore I wanted to bring up is, like, do you think because look, there's a Western hardcore movement, there's a East Coast hardcore movement, there's a European hardcore movement. You know, to me, I could tell that Cro-Mags is from New York. I could tell that Agnostic Front is from New York.
Yeah.
Sick of it all. But do you think that, depending on where the hardcore band is from, that could also influence where they're from?
It's funny. Yes and no. I'm writing reviews for In Effect fanzine. They have a website. There used to be an amazing print fanzine in the 80s and 90s, and now it's back as a website, and it's a really good website, In Effect Hardcore. And I'm doing reviews for it. I used to do reviews when it was print magazine. And I just reviewed a band from California who sounded, I mean, the California bands did have a distinct sound, and this band sounded 100% like a late 80s New York hardcore band. And I was like, I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, I heard absolutely no California influence in this band whatsoever. So yes and no. I think it just depends on what the kids in the band like.
Okay, to an extent. And I'd imagine, like, now, like, back in your day, sorry to make you feel old, but, like, there was also this sense where, like, you know, if you were at a Murphy's Law show, you were going to discover all these other hardcore bands because everybody was around each other. Nowadays, with the internet, anybody who wants to start a hardcore band could, you know, look up top 10 best hardcore bands, and it could be a band from California, a band.
See, that's it's kind of weird and a little sad in a way that it's not a lot of authenticity. There's not it doesn't take much to do your homework. It doesn't take a lot of homework. You know, it just takes a few clicks. In a way, that's good because you can find something as a happy accident, you know, whereas coming up in the 80s and 90s, it was tape trading, it was fanzines, it was word of mouth, it was getting to the show early to see the opening bands, you know. Thankfully, people do still do that, so that's good, you know.
Yeah. I've discovered a lot of local bands just because they were like the local opening spot on like a big show.
Sure. I mean, still to this day, when Inhuman goes out and plays, or The Last Stand plays, there's always a band or two on the bill that I have never heard a note of, and I like, and I become a fan of theirs, and I'll buy their shit and make friends, and that's kind of how it's supposed to be. Like, that's how it works, you know.
Exactly, and you never know where that band is going to be. Inhuman played with Burn the Priest.
Yes, in a basement in front of 25 people. Yeah.
Can you tell me anything about?
Well, it was 20 years ago. My band Inhuman did an East Coast tour, and we played in North Carolina. It was, you know, DIY tour booked by our friend Mark Lopez, who's in a band Two Man Advantage. Say what's up to them from Long Island.
All right, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're like hockey, hardcore punk band, and yeah, they were playing with this band Burn the Priest, and they were weird. They were like really heavy, kind of hardcore, kind of like a little death metal, a little thrash metal, but they had their kind of their own sound, you know, almost like this kind of dirty, punkish in a way. But the singer, I remember, was like crazy, like he was hanging from there was like a pipe in the ceiling, and he was hanging from it, and we hung out with those guys all night. And you know, the guys in my band were you know, more into, you know, partying than I was, and they were like, you know, drinking and smoking with them all night, and blah blah blah, and it was cool. And then like a year or so later, I think their LP comes out, or it was later that year. But within another 6 months, I'm working for this music distributor in a band called Lamb of God, has their first record out.
And this was New American Gospel.
This is the very first album.
Okay.
The very first album. I can't think of the name of the very first album, which I believe was on Prosthetic or Metal Blade at the time. Prosthetic, yes, which was distributed by a company I was working at, this music company. And I went, these guys look really familiar. And I didn't put two and two together that it was the same band, because I lost contact with them. And when I realized it was them, I was like, holy shit, wow. I'm like, man, this is like, these guys stepped their game up. Like, I mean, this is like really good. And with each album, the band was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and yeah.
Lo and behold,
Lo and
but
behold.
you saw them in a basement back in the day, and
Yeah, it's
that's
the same
why.
band.
And you know, to me, the most beautiful thing about hardcore is that there is a brotherhood. You know, I've been to shows of all types, whether it's a huge band and some people leave after they came to see the band that they want to see,
Right.
or you know, people play their set and they leave after their set, don't stick around for the other bands, which is a no-no. Do not do that. But like to me, there's a hardcore brotherhood, like that show I saw Inhuman at with a Marauder and Sworn Enemy.
Yeah, it was a cancer benefit last year.
That was a great show.
Well, that was good because, I mean, look, a lot of times, look, any scene, metal scene, hardcore scene, when you come together for a cause like that, you get the best of people, you know? No one's going to want to kill each other. You're going to want to watch the bands. You're going to want to support the bands. And you saw, like, you know, a good example,
Yeah,
you know?
Definitely. I mean, I think some people were trying to kill each other. I think somebody bit my ankle in the mosh pit.
There might have been one skirmish.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, it
was in good faith. They meant well.
It was good fun.
But like I saw, like, because I got there like at like maybe 5 or 6, but I know that the show started at like 2.
Yeah.
And I saw some of the bands that were like scheduled to open at 2, and they were still there meeting the other bands, watching
I mean, it was
the
a
other
long
bands.
day. I mean, that's what kind of fests are, you know, or things like that. You know, are.
But to me, that is the beauty of hardcore, is that there is a unity into it. And to me, I mean, that is what could, I guess, make a band that people would argue isn't hardcore.
That's the thing. Hardcore is weird in that it has bands in its scene that sonically are metal bands, like Marauder, like Ringworm, like Integrity, Twitching Tongues, right? But their mindset and their fans and their whole kind of like what they're about is hardcore. It's just weird. Like All Out War is an example too. They are a metal band in the hardcore scene, basically, and accepted by the hardcore people because they themselves are hardcore people.
Yeah. But hardcore does have a distinct sound. Like when I hear hardcore music, I immediately think of Agnostic Front or Sick of It All. But there is sometimes a brotherhood at a show with bands that sound nothing like those.
Yeah, the bands I mentioned, right, don't sound like the bands you just mentioned, but they're a part of the same world, and they have a lot of the same fans, and it's you know, it's in that same kind of umbrella, you know.
Absolutely. And to me, that it doesn't get more hardcore than that.
No, exactly. I mean, I don't think you're going to see that in the hard rock world. I mean, from my understanding, I have friends who are in like hard rock bands, and they play shows, and they say the guys in the bands that they play with are dicks, and people act like complete rock stars, and when they in reality are 5 times smaller than a small hardcore band, and it's just there's no need for that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the band too, but there is true. I've never seen, like, at those hardcore shows, despite being the most violent pits I've ever seen, they're always helping each other back up.
Yeah, most of the time.
For the most part. And I'm talking like on the early spot on a matinee show, people are doing that.
No, absolutely.
Once you have one too many, then I guess it's every man for himself.
I feel like I've seen the worst of the worst. There was bad times in the 90s when nobody was picking anybody up off the floor, but these days people pick people up off the floor. Yeah.
Well, that is true, and I mean, because we can't afford to also have another venue suit over it.
Well, that's the other problem. Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that we're seeing some new venues let hardcore shows even happen. That's great.
Yeah, that's the beauty. Like Kingsland had that Cro-Mag show, which is,
and there's a new venue, Coney Island Baby, where Inhuman's playing on the 18th, the first night of the Black and Blue Bowl.
Yep.
Black and Blue weekend is
shout out to Isaac
and Cousin Joe and Black and Blue Productions. Yeah, might as well just plug the whole thing.
Yeah, do it.
May 18th, 19th, and 20th is the annual Black and Blue Bowl. The 18th is going to be at Coney Island Baby, and it's going to have Inhuman, Brick by Brick, Danny Diablo, a band called Examine, a band called The Unruly Boys, a bunch of other. I think there's 7 bands total. That's the first night at Coney Island Baby, a new spot in the Lower East Side. And then the next 2 nights are going to be right here, not too far away, at Brooklyn Bazaar. The 19th is going to have Crown of Thorns and Madball. And then the 20th, the headliners are Judge and Agnostic Front. So
That's an
it's going to
awesome.
be a great weekend.
Yeah, I'll be at the Agnostic Front show.
Cool. Yeah.
And I'll
yeah.
definitely be seeing you there too.
And then you have yet another powerhouse happening that Saturday. It's the Misfits reunion out in Jersey. That show.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on next week.
Misfits have been compared to hardcore too, and I'm like, hardcore wasn't
Well,
even I felt like they weren't even a sperm at that point.
Well, here's the thing though. Here's the funny thing about them. They came out in '77. They were a punk band, made punk records. Their last record, Earth AD, which came out in 1983, which they broke up that year, is a hardcore record. It's fast as hell. It's really fast, and it was partly inspired by the hardcore that was going on at the time, like Negative Approach, and like they had been playing with these heavier bands with Misfits in their later days. And yes, they have a hardcore record, Earth AD.
I guess every band's got to try it at one point.
Oh yeah, then that was their last year of existence, and then Glenn went on to do Sam Hain, and then of course Danzig.
Yeah,
history was written.
Yeah, and who would have thought?
So now the Misfits do have a hardcore record.
I feel like every band has a hardcore record. I just know it. Because, I've heard a lot of, like, Killswitch Engage, one of my favorite bands of all time. Like, Jesse, who's the singer, was into that hardcore.
Yeah, from what I understand, he's a big hardcore guy. I mean, I don't know him personally.
And Randy Bly, too.
Yeah, no, him I knew was a hardcore guy from when I met him that night years ago.
At that basement.
Yes, in that basement. But yeah, man, it's amazing, like the musical journey like I've had. When I was 15, I was on this compilation called the New Breed compilation. It was a band that was very short-lived called Direct Approach. I was the bass player. And we recorded our 2 songs, and we broke up before the comp even came out. And we got to record at Don Fury Studios, which is this legendary like hardcore studio. He now records in upstate New York. He still does music, still does hardcore bands too. He did like Quicksand records. He's done Sick of It All records. He's done you name it. And getting to record there, literally 3 months into the hardcore scene, was a trip. Then later on, a band I was in with John, Close Call.
Yeah. Did
2 demos in 1 year with Don Fury, and it's crazy. The band I was in that I mentioned before, Confusion, was the one we did at least 5 or 6 shows at Life of Agony between like 90 and 94.
And who would have thought that they would have blown up the way
Yeah,
they,
I mean, bands have roots. They have roots in hardcore. And bands take different journeys. They bands change, and it is what it is.
I think hardcore, because to me hardcore is like the definition of like an underground scene and stuff like that, and all these big bands that are above ground, but I feel like it always looms in the hardcore shadow, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Like a lot of people over the years, like I've heard crazy things about even people who were like, oh, like I love the Bad Brains, and like people you meet at your job or whatever, like these weird normal people that used to go to shows at one point in their life, or like still listen to Minor Threat and the Bad Brains and Sick of It All, but they may not go to shows anymore. But like, it's just I think it's like a part of you that kind of just stays with you if you're not like an active person in the scene.
Yeah. And again, I feel like there's integrity in hardcore where everybody sticks around for the bands. Funny story, my brother opened up for this band. My brother used to be in a death metal band, and they opened up for this band called Shabooti. And yes, worst band title ever.
It's a terrible band.
And they were like, all right, we're not sticking around for these guys, whatever. You know what that band later became?
Who?
Coheed and Cambria.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. They played this place in Bensonhurst called the Temple. There was this cool venue. It was an actual Jewish temple that let the kids have punk and hardcore shows.
That's
from
awesome.
From like 98 to 2002. They played there a few times, actually. Yeah.
Which is awesome. So
everybody played there.
Bottom line is, learn from the hardcore movement. Stick around for every band.
You never know,
regardless
man.
Get there early for every opening band, because you never know where they're gonna be.
It's true.
And it's gonna be rooted probably in hardcore.
Inhuman, before this band was big, we played the basement of the singer for Thursday. Jeff, the singer of the band Thursday, used to have hardcore shows in his mom's house, in his house, basically, and we played his basement. So.
Yeah.
It's pretty weird.
You never know. But Mike, thanks for being the
Yes.
first guest on
You're welcome.
HNY Talks.
And I just want to give one more plug.
Yeah, do it.
So yeah, Inhuman's doing another show on June 24th at Knitting Factory with Sheer Terror.
I'll be there.
And The Last Stand is doing a show for my birthday, July 22nd, at the Hideout in Bay Ridge.
Yep.
And then August 4th, we are doing a free show in Coney Island with the Brooklyn metal band Annika. See, there's an example of metal and hardcore kind of, coming together again.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And we got to keep it more diverse. I like it when, like...
It's a mixed bill.
Yeah. I once saw a show. It was Arch Enemy, Trivium, While She Sleeps, and Fit for an Autopsy. 4 completely different bands, all on one bill, and the show was packed. And that's how it's got to be.
Well, thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolutely.
You're a great guy, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for supporting every kind of music in New York there is. This guy supports.
Thank you. I try.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Mike Scondotto, Inhuman, and The Last Stand.